So now let's go to the database mirror, right click, tasks, and mirror. And you'll get this, database mirroring properties. So obviously ensure the security is configured for this database. In order to start database mirroring, you have to click on configure security. And as soon as you do that, this pop-up window will start the wizard. Here you can see the widget helps you configure security settings for the mirroring database mirror. And this is the database we're going to mirror. It allows you to configure security settings for the principal server, which is the primary server, the mirrored server, which is the secondary server. And if you have a witness, which is an optional, then we can set that up. I don't have a witness and I don't want to use it, and I don't want an example for it. So we're just going to go next. Obviously, it's asking if we want to include a witness in our example. Again, I'd opt not to, even in a production environment, but you may want to test that in yourself. But you have to have a separate instance for this, meaning you'll have to have a third instance right here if you want to use witness. But for our purposes, we're good. So select no, go next. Now here, obviously, we're going to connect to the principal server. So this is just allowing us to communicate with the principal server and set up the securities for this. You'll notice it is defaulted listening port 5022. Leave that and make sure your firewall is ask your administrator to make sure he has this this port is accessible through the firewall. It will encrypt the data sent through this endpoints. Now you can obviously uncheck it. I like to leave it. And since this is the principal, I want to change this endpoint. Now endpoints are communication points, if you will, between the source and the destination. And this is how it communicates with each other. So I'm going to call this principal, so I can so I can distinguish principal endpoint between mirror, and go next. It's going to ask you now to connect to the mirror server. Obviously, this is the mirror server called dev. So we're going to go connect, and obviously it defaults to that, and go connect. One thing to note is that the listener port, the previous one was 5022. This one is 5223. If you're using, if you're configuring database mirroring on a single machine, then you must have separate ports. If I put 522, then we'll get error. But this does it automatically for us. And it's called endpoint mirror, so we're good. So I'll go next. Here it's asking for the service accounts that will manage the SQL instances. In our case, since we're doing it on a single machine and it's a non-domain, we can leave these blank. If you were to do this on a domain, then whichever account, service account or domain account is being used by SQL agent on each server, that needs to go here. So if you, for example, if this was being used in a domain environment, and we would go to this server and look at its services and look at its SQL agent service, and then change that service count and dump it here. We would go to this separate box in a domain environment. We would look at the SQL agent service that's running and dump it here. But since we're not doing it here, we can go next. Here you'll get obviously the end of the completion of the wizard, and it just looks at the choices that we have. So make sure we're good. This is the instance, that's great. This is the mirror, that's great. It'll just give you the outline and go finish. And now you can, if you execute it, if you just expand that, you'll see that they're creating endpoints for the principal server and creating a endpoint for the mirror server. And as you can see, it's successful. Close it. Now at this point, we can start the database mirroring, or we can postpone database mirroring and do it later. I'm going to go do not start at this point because I want you to go over some of these options here. We've gone through configuration settings, so we can start mirroring if we wish. Take a note of the server network addresses. You got the TCP :/ followed by the server name followed by the port number. Remember, these are different port numbers. If it was in a domain, you can use similar port numbers. You can use 52022 here, 5022 here, because it's on a separate boxes. Since this is a single box, you can't use it. Another thing to note is if we were doing this in a domain environment, you'd supply here the entire, what's called a fully qualified name. And the fully qualified name is TCP: :// followed by the server name, dot, followed by the domain name. It would have been sql.com, followed by :, followed by the port number. So take a note of that also. Here's what we were talking about, the operating mode. By default, it's selected high safety without automatic failover, which is synchronous. And remember what it says, always commit changes to both the principal and the mirror. So remember when we talked about that here, is we talked about when it's in a synchronous mode, all data that is modified here is sent to the database mirrored here. And once this is completed, then it sends it back to the application that's connecting to the principal server, and then it can proceed. Whereas in asynchronous mode, if you choose asynchronous mode, then obviously the updates are followed here, and they're automatically sent to the application server that's connected to this principal server, and then it goes to the server and updates. So there's a slight latency period. But again, like I said, you have to either select which one do you want. Now, obviously, you're going to get better performance selecting this if that's one of your options, because commit changes at the principal, then transfer them to the mirror. Because obviously, you're doing less work, if you will, here in asynchronous mode than doing it in a synchronous mode. For our purposes, we'll just leave it here, and that's it. And you can look at the status, and now we can start SQL. Now, one thing to note here, look at it just says mirror here. And if we expand this, it just says mirroring restoring. So as soon as I go start mirroring, watch what happens here. Now, obviously, this is Puppet, just to illustrate that it's not using a fully qualified name, which is a domain name. And since we're not, we can say yes. And it'll start. And there we go, it's starting. Synchronized database are fully synchronized. That's giving you the status. And we have database mirroring. If you can see here, you'll see that the mirrored database now is principal and it's synchronized. And here, if I refresh this, it's mirror synchronized also. So you can view that. That's what we were looking at here. Great. Now let's do a couple of things here, and we go, okay. So now we have a system where we have database mirroring. This is the principal where we can access this database, and this is the mirror where we can not. Now what I'm going to show you is how to fail over the database. So I'm going to go okay here, and we're good. We're going to go to our principal server. We're going to open this database. We're going to open the tables, right click, and we're going to create new data. And just go X. And again, we're just emulating data. Now, obviously, again, as I mentioned many times, this is going to happen very quickly because there's no data primarily. This is for demonstration purposes. In the real life, you will have to take into consideration that if you have a tremendous amount of data here and you're migrating this data and mirroring the data, it may take some time. So here you'll see that I have two tables right now. So what I'm going to do is to fail over. To fail over means I'm going to change the status of this principal. This is become mirror, and this now is going to become principal. I'm changing database roles. I'm switching it. What's called failover. To fail over a database mirror, right click, tasks. Now, obviously, before I do that, why would you do that? Obviously, this is where all the applications and your users are getting all the data and writing reports and so on. But let's say we need to do maintenance. Let's say we need to do a service pack on this server itself, and we need to take this down. We need to push all the people to this server now because this is inaccessible, as you can see. So that's the reason you would do it. So continuing, we want to switch the roles from principal to mirror. So go right click, tasks, mirror, and all you have to do is say fail over and go fail over it. It's going to ask you, yes, we're going to swap the roles of the mirror and principal. The database will become principal and the current principal become inaccessible. So make sure you read this, understand it. It's basically switching roles. Go yes. And that's it. And as you can see now, if I refresh this, this has become the principal, and if I refresh that, this has become the mirror, and it's restoring state. Now, if I go here, I should see two tables, and I do. So that's how you do a manual failover. and we've done database mirroring, and we've switched roles, and that's great. So now when we're now we can work on this. Now all the applications and users are pointed to this, and they're doing their updates, and they can now create database, or not create database, but modify data or do whatever the company does, and that's it. And let's kill that. Now if I go here, sync it, now I have 3 tables here, so data is being modified here. And obviously I can reverse the roles if I wish. And let's see if we can do that. Maybe there'll be a disconnect, but we'll see. Right click, tasks, mirror, failover, yes. And now if I go here, remember this is a mirror, principal, mirror, and synced. And now if I execute this, look at the table, I should have 3 tables, which I do. So that's how easy it is to set up database mirroring. Obviously, again, this is a single machine, but the principle is exactly the same. The only thing we're changing are the security features and making sure that the SQL agent has access to this folder, because it's by both servers. So this is the concept of database mirroring, where we switch roles and allow applications to switch physical servers, and this way we always have what's called a hot standby. So should this go down for any reason, we always have a standby, and this is the process you will do. Now obviously I did this manually. You can set up a what's called a witness, where you have the 3rd instance, and if this fails for any reason, it does it automatically for you. This manual physical thing that I'm doing here, this failover, it'll do it automatically for you, but I prefer not to do it, but you may want to test it later. So that's database mirroring in a nutshell. I think you get the concept now, and what I'm going to be doing in the next video is showing you a few scripts. So let me see if I can go over here. So I'm going to be doing this entire process again using SQL T-SQL, so you understand what the commands are for doing this entire process that we did through the GUI. And then I'm going to be giving you some very important scripts that you can start monitoring. So if I execute this, you can see now obviously the database name, what is synchronized now, the database role, and so on, and all this kind of data. So I'll be giving you all these scripts that you can run against, and this is what you want to do on a kind of a weekly or daily basis, run a few scripts to verify everything is fine. And this is important for connectivities, if you want to look at connections and so on. But I'll be doing that in the next video when we talk about how to set up database mirroring using T-SQL. So I think I'll leave it there, and I'll give you a good understanding of what database mirroring is. So I'll see you in the next video. So my name is Raphael, and this is how to become a production SQL database administrator. See you in the next video.